Hello, 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 and welcome to Topic Tuesday. I'm your MC Sabam Nim, Paul Van Squek, and I'm here to talk to you about the art you love, the art of Taekwondo. And today, a very special episode, a different martial arts style that a lot of you guys also practice, known as Hapkido. So, grab your Culvers iced tea, settle in, and enjoy a refreshing episode of Topic Tuesday this week. All right, let's jump in. I've got some topics from you guys, but I want to start with my own topic, and that is Hapkido. What's it good for? A lot of you have done it before. Have any of you used it? Have you found that those wrist locks don't really seem to work out very well? Well, let's delve into that. Let's start out with this idea that floats around a lot that I hate it. And that's that your martial art has to solve every problem. It just won't, guys. Martial arts can specialize in a specific area and really be designed to deal with that specific context. So when I look at a martial art and how functional it is, I like to start by identifying what exactly it is it's trying to be functional at, rather than just viewing a martial art as some sort of broad spectrum answer to every possible combative scenario. Now, if you want to wrestle someone, Hapkido is not a great martial art style. And that goes for its twin brother, Aikido. So here's my story. Of course, you know I study Taekwondo. The Taekwondo school I'm still a part of. The place I trained when I came up through the ranks. They also had a Hapkido program that I did for 3-4 years. And it was an add-on program. It wasn't like a huge part of the school, but it was something that was of huge interest to me. And eventually, I decided to study Aikido to get a deeper knowledge of that type of movement system. And what I ended up doing is I found the nearest, what I perceived to be high-quality Aikido dojo in the area, dedicated dojo. And it was like an hour and 10 minutes from me. And for 7 years, I went up there at least twice a week, sometimes more for seminars and so forth, unless I was sick or something. And hour and 10-minute drive there and back. I put 100,000 miles on a car over 4 years doing that. Of course, gas was expensive too. And then I, at least once a week at my own dojang, just grabbed some people and I'm like, hey, you're in my Aikido club. And that was a way for them to learn some Aikido and for me to get to practice the stuff I was doing up there. And after 6 years, I got my first degree black belt they call Shodan in Aikido, and I did it for another year and then decided that I wasn't going to continue to make the drive anymore. And shortly after, that dojo had to close because we ran into the COVID timeline and they did not make it, very sadly. But I learned a lot of great things through that program, and I have a lot of, what should I say, fond memories of training in the system. And so the thing is, right, I learned all this Aikido, and I was aware of the criticisms of it. I thought, I want to get to at least a black belt before I really try to determine just how useful this stuff is. And yeah, if you take it and you try to wrestle around with people with Aikido, I mean, you might be able to slam a technique on someone here and there, but it didn't seem like black belt level status advantage over other people like I had with, let's say if I went to do Olympic sparring with someone in Taekwondo. I mentioned this maybe in one other episode. If someone comes off the street and they want to do Olympic sparring with me and they don't have any prior training, I don't care how big they are or anything. I'm injured. I have an arthritic hip. I'm not worried about that person because being a black belt coming up and doing enough Olympic sparring just gives you a huge advantage over someone who hasn't done it before. I didn't feel like I had that with Aikido if I tried to grapple people with it. Like I say, I might have had the occasional technique workout, but it was far from an unfair advantage. And I kept trying to figure out, where's this thing going to work? Because the criticism that people have is totally valid, which is that Aikido, as traditionally practiced, has no live training drills. There's no form of sparring unless you're talking about some of the offshoots like Tomiki Aikido, Shotokan Aikido. It's all cooperative partner exercises. And they're very dynamic partner exercises that involve giving your partner pressure and connection, and they teach a lot of good things. But ultimately, there's no contingency learning from that because your technique always succeeds when you're doing cooperative partner practice. So I kept trying to spar with it in different ways, and it kept coming up short. But I thought, these techniques go way back. Sure, Aikido itself is a relatively new system, but it's like a synthesis of all these older Japanese martial arts. And I want to clarify real quick, if you're like, what does this have to do with Hapkido? The two are just, they're very closely related. The founder of Hapkido, I believe, studied the same martial art as the founder of Aikido, and they are actually written exactly the same way. In Korean, you pronounce it Hapkido, in Japanese, Aikido. So they share a lot. Okay, back to my story. How do I use this stuff? Well, the techniques, yeah, they're a synthesis of all these older Japanese martial arts. And I thought, surely, hundreds of years of conflict in Japan, they came up with some good stuff. And then further to that point, if you look at European martial arts manuals, like fencing manuals, a lot of the same techniques crop up. And it's like, well, what is this? Is this a battlefield martial art? I don't understand exactly what's going on here. I can't get it to work. Well, eventually I came across this guy, Heinz Sensei, Christopher Heinz. He's got a channel out there. I think it's called Heinz Approach to Aikido now. He has a dojo in Fresno, California. And he's cross-trained in all sorts of other stuff, so he's well aware of live training, the faults of Aikido. And he's kind of figured out, like, what exactly Aikido is supposed to be used for. And then once you figure that out, you can start designing your training around that, and oh, some of this stuff actually seems to work pretty good. So what is that? Well, there's a few things it's good for, okay? Number one is staying autonomous, meaning preventing someone from grabbing hold of you and keeping you stuck somewhere. Aikido is actually really good at popping out of different holds and positioning yourself in a way where it's very difficult for someone to grab or strike you. Now, what's interesting about this is it has very little to do with fighting, because when you're doing this, you're not trying to hurt the other person with anything. You're just purely trying to remove yourself from their ability to hurt you. So you're putting yourself in ranges where the only possible way for them to get you is to overextend, and you're putting yourself in angles where you have an advantage. And so he was pointing out that a lot of the kata, the partner exercises you do, they contain a whole host of techniques inside of that particular sequence, and that you kind of follow the technique to the least likely part that you're going to use. So the first part is always like a body shift when someone's coming in to grab or strike you. And if you simply use that one piece, you can often either redirect their strike or pop out of their grip. And if you practice like that, you'll find that those things are actually quite usable against live resisting partners. Okay, now if they continue to want to hold on to you, if they really overextend themselves to continue to grab or try to strike you, then it becomes possible to use the next pieces in the sequence of the technique. But if you stop thinking about the kata partner exercise as one whole thing you're trying to do to someone, and more so a broad transmission of multiple techniques in a package of knowledge, well, suddenly you've got a lot of tools to play with in one kata, and it makes a lot more sense. So I'm like, I only have a first dan in Aikido, but I don't want to continue to study through the traditional avenues, because Really what they're concerned with is just making you more and more aesthetically pleasing when it comes to the partner exercises. Again, there's no live training. If they tell you something's better, it's not better because it has worked for them more when they're sparring. It's just better because that's the way Sensei said to do it. And ultimately, I feel like that's going to lead to a dead end. So I don't want to continue practicing in that channel, but I really want to continue to experiment with the art because I think it has a lot of stuff in it that hasn't really been sussed out yet in live training. Whereas other arts have done the work already, like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it's put the legwork in. We know exactly what works well, what doesn't. I'm sure it can evolve down the road yet, but it's pretty darn refined. Wrist locks, right? We discussed they're not a great way to throw someone. They're not nearly as good at controlling someone as like a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu submission. So what are they for? Well, that leads into the second thing Aikido is good for. We said it's good for staying autonomous. Number 2, it's good for disarming. A lot of the wrist locks in Aikido, if someone's got something in their hand, are very good for removing said item from their hand. Now when you do that, it doesn't mean they're going to fall down on the floor and that you then pin them. And that's the way we always practiced our disarms in the classical Aikido I did. Someone lunges at you with a knife, you redirect, take the wrist, throw them down, pin them, take the knife. But you can actually start the lock on the wrist and immediately the object they're holding on to loosens up in their grip, and you can often just pop it out of their hand with no need for a takedown at all, though that is an option if they really desperately try to grip. And often if they really desperately try to grip, they lose track of the other things going on, and you can actually put them on the floor using that wrist lock. Now that has to be practiced. It's not something you can just do because I said you can do it. You have to do the drilling in a live format where the other person's not letting you do it. And I've been experimenting with this for 3-4 years now. I don't have a ton of time to put into it a week, but probably something like about 3.5 hours or so per week I work on Aikido. So maybe an hour of that I get to spend doing practice with these sorts of live drills where I myself can practice. But in the course of that time, I have found that yes, these things, I'm getting better at them and they seem to work. And now I've had enough time where I've got students doing it, and sure enough, they can take weapons away much more easily than when they started. They have what almost seems like an unfair advantage. Now, I haven't vetted this fully yet. I would be very interested to see what would happen if you took someone who had, say, a year of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu training and you tried to have them do the same things. Maybe their toolbox would be better. I don't know. I have not put the work in that regard, or I've never had that opportunity. But the Aikido wrist lock toolbox seems really good for taking stuff away from people. That's the second thing it's good for. Okay, now that number 3, you can use a lot of the exact same techniques to retain your weapon. Imagine that you're the one that's armed, and so often we think of martial arts where you're the unarmed person and people are attacking you with weapons and you have to deal with it. But realistically, especially if there's multiple people attacking you, you're the one who should be armed if you want to seriously consider dealing with threats like that. And a lot of times what's going to happen especially if you're dealing with more than one person, is while you're striking one person with your weapon or stabbing or whatever you're doing with it, another person will try to gain control of that arm to prevent you from using the weapon. Well, so many of the throws and locks in Aikido work great to pop them off of you and reposition yourself at the same time to stay autonomous, basically, so that they can't keep a hold of your weapon. Now, have you ever seen like the Aikido demonstrations where someone's like chasing the instructor's hand and they'll follow them in a circle almost, and they'll like seemingly throw themselves because they're so desperately trying to get this guy's hand, and you're like, why are you chasing his hand? That doesn't make any sense. There you go. They're chasing after the weapon. They don't want that guy to have the unfair advantage of having a weapon deployed. Suddenly, these things start to make more sense. Okay, now what's the final thing that Aikido does have a really good toolbox for? Well, if I'm dealing with a college wrestler, I'm not going to use any Aikido locks on them and get them to work. They're just going to pick me up and break me on the floor. Okay. Let's say I'm a police officer and there's a belligerent female who's smaller than me. I've seen tons of videos of this kind of stuff. And it gets to the point where I've got to arrest them and they are resisting. Can you imagine if I don't have a lot of tools to deal with that? I saw a video of an officer. He was so much bigger than this woman. She's resisting, giving him a hard time. And he pulls out his baton and starts wailing on her legs with it to try to get her to submit to his arrest. That doesn't look great, especially in today's era where police violence is so much a part of the media. Whatever your opinion is on it, you should consider that if you're in a position like that, you want to make it look as reasonable as possible when you arrest someone, as though you're causing the least amount of damage that you can to get that person under control. Now, obviously, I'm not in this guy's shoes. I don't know exactly what it was like to deal with this woman, but I am 90% certain that I could have grabbed a hold of her when she was resisting like that and put her down with one of the different Aikido techniques. And it looks very tame. It does not look like you're hurting the person. And as soon as you let up on the technique, it really hasn't caused any major damage to them. It's a pretty peaceful way to subdue someone. I'm almost sure I could have gotten that situation under control in a way where I wouldn't have had to go to court later. So that's a strange use case. Not a lot of us are in positions like that, but that is, I think, a really good toolbox for these Aikido techniques. And let's just broaden it. Let's put it this way. We're talking about controlling someone with a lock or pin, and you'll notice that a lot of them allow you to stay standing or access your other hand. You can pin someone and maintain high mobility. That is different from something like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, where you have a lot more security in that you're using your entire body basically to put this person into a pin submission type position. But if you need to get up or disengage, you're fully committed. It's going to take you a while to do so. A lot of the Aikido pins, you can stay standing. And so if you need to disengage or if you need other people to come in and help you, it's the preferred method. It has an advantage over the more secure pin in that it gives you higher mobility. I think, again, something that hasn't been considered. Now, is this useful in combat sports? It's not. And that's, I think, a big reason why it's underdeveloped. I find it really interesting, which is pretty much why I spend so much time on it. But I do think it could be useful in certain career fields where people might need this kind of stuff. So that's what I'm working on right now is trying to come up with the right methods of drilling these techniques, the right type of sparring or live training that puts it into context where it's actually useful, and then see if we're developing a skill that is specifically developing a skill that's not better perfected through another martial art like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, developing a skill that is unique to an art like Aikido or Hapkido. If you're interested, I'll try to share some stuff on that with you guys, like videos of the kind of things we're doing to make that happen. But I'm really starting to feel like I'm seeing some progress here. So that's cool. All right, now on to your stuff. Let's see what we got here. We have, and by the way, if anybody ever leaves a comment and I don't address it, you have a question, sometimes I just miss them. Feel free to leave it again. maybe I can get to it down the road. I try not to ignore people unless you're just a dingus. But most comments and questions I like to discuss, just because even if I disagree, it makes for good content, right? This comes from Zach Mitch 6472. Excuse me, one moment. I'm going to sniffle. I'm sorry, I don't have a mute button, and I won't edit it out because I'm not going to take the time. I'm just sorry. Okay. Zach says, this is in regards to last week's Topic Tuesday. I have a comment on the first question, which was about how long it takes to get deadly in Taekwondo. Zach says, okay, I'm not tall, I'm not very strong, I'm just slim, athletic looking guy, although I have some health problems too. But I happen to live in a quarter filled with quite wild neighbors. It's a premium quarter, but it's also bordering on the wilds of a mountain. Maybe that's it, the mountain. Don't know why. Whenever I quarrel about something, as soon as I start acting bravado, I make myself ready to deliver a good, powerful sidekick. Then he says, if needed, of course. My wild neighbors, so funny how he describes these people. My wild neighbors seem to reduce the volume and step back. Unless they're in a group, again, of course. The social group, the birthplace of violence, he says. I understand that if I happen to be in a fight, maybe I'd lose, but preventing the fight with body language and sometimes starting to look intimidating yourself, isn't that better? By the way, well, let's address that first. Yeah, so obviously if you know some stuff and you're more comfortable with violence than other people, just through your sparring, competition, that kind of thing, if we're just talking about conventional sport Taekwondo, you're going to have an air about you that's different from a lot of other people. And certainly that is detectable and may deter fights. I would also mention that you might want to tone down on the bravado if you don't want to fight. That's probably going to be step one. But yes, body language, that's huge. All right, then he goes and says, by the way, here's a question about Topic Tuesday. What would be the best way to tackle a rushing forward attacker? Best, you wouldn't need to strike twice. Say he's double the weight, but not really athletic. All right. Well, I'm a little confused about the question. He says, what would be the best way to tackle a rushing forward attacker? And then says, best, you wouldn't need to strike twice, implying that it's some kind of strike, but you're tackling them. I'm not exactly sure. So I'm going to address this two different ways. Let's say he just didn't phrase this the way that he meant to, and he's talking about dealing with someone who's trying to tackle you. Let's rewind to the beginning of Topic Tuesday this week and talk about how not every martial art is designed for every context. I don't think Taekwondo has a great answer for someone tackling you. Theoretically, you could say knee them, but I think you need to have some reflexes built to just remove your legs back as though you're sprawling to get ready to do a knee strike. So generally speaking, I would say study the sprawl. And you don't have to be expert. You don't have to be like a wrestler quality at this kind of stuff, but just understanding how to shoot your legs out from underneath you and push them down so that they can't get to your legs. That's a huge thing, and it's pretty easy to drill. Just have some people try to grab your legs and tackle you, or grab your torso and tackle you, where they duck down low, and you put your hands on them and kick your legs out. And get a reasonable understanding of what that's like. And I think that's going to be better than trying to use any kind of technique that is visibly apparent in the Taekwondo forms or in sparring to deal with that. Now let's say you're trying to tackle someone who's rushing at you. I'm not exactly sure why you would ever want to do that in sort of a self-defense situation, because now you're choosing to close the gap and engage with someone who you don't necessarily have to engage with. Like if they're moving in toward you, I would try to keep distance, to position myself in ways where they can't reach me, or again, if they try to reach me, they overextend themselves, or they run into, if you're just using techniques from Taekwondo, they run into some of your strikes on the way in. If you're going to go in for a tackle, you probably really want to study stuff like, again, wrestling, judo, something that gives you a good toolbox for that particular tactic or strategy, I should say, not tactic. That strategy of trying to move in and then put someone on the ground. You know, the judo guys talk about hitting people with the earth. If you hit them once with the earth with a really good throw, that might be all it takes. But unless you're doing extracurricular stuff that's not in the typical Taekwondo syllabus, there's not really throws that do that. And if there are, some of you traditionalists are like starting to type already, I can feel it. Are you drilling it like the judo guys? Are you getting really good at it and drilling it against live people? As much as in Taekwondo, we get good at throwing a front leg roundhouse kick, because that's how good they are at the throws, to be able to just slam someone down and hit them with the earth like we talked about. You can't get that by kind of statically practicing once a week for 10 minutes in your traditional Taekwondo class. Oh, I feel the typing already. Oh, okay. So let's move on to the next comment, which is not a question, but it comes from my new favorite martial arts podcast, Combat Learning. If you haven't yet, I recommended it last week. Check it out, because it's all about the types of things you need to do to really excel in the martial arts in a functional way. Such good content, which really inspired me to talk about the stuff that I've been doing with Aikido or Hapkido the past few years. That's why I talked about it this day, because I've been listening to Combat Learning. Combat Learning says Culvers is the best. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And he says, thank you so much for the shout out. I'd love to talk more. Combat Learning, if you're listening, if you ever want to collaborate or something, let's do it. I'm all about it. Maybe let me finish all your content first so I don't sound like a total dingus if we ever talk and record it. But no, I'd love to reach out and talk to you more. I don't know how on YouTube, actually. Is there like a messenger thing or something? Anyway, I'm really just I'm honored that you are watching this stuff, and I'm really enjoying your things as well. And guys, if you haven't, check it out, Combat Learning. Well, that's it for this week's Topic Tuesday. Didn't quite reach the 33-minute mark, so sorry. But as always, if you have your own comments, topics, please leave them, and I'll talk about them next time. And I want to tell you, stay on the lookout. Stay on the lookout. I am releasing this week, it's going to be this week, the evolution of Taekwondo kicking video. I think you guys are really going to like it. It is the biggest project I've worked on in this channel. It's taken me hours and hours, and I'm still not there yet, but I should have enough time to crank it out this week. Hopefully you like it. So stay tuned for that. Until next time, enjoy your training and your Culvers. Peace.